Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another video, this one called The Whys and Hows. Everything that you wanted to know about StarCraft, why we do it, how it works, how to execute it properly, and how to take advantage of things. Sometimes, with games, you get offered pieces of advice when you're looking for help, and it's only half the battle. And I often tell that to people when I'm coaching them about build orders. So a build order is a great example of how to start a game and how to get yourself into a certain position. But a build order itself typically doesn't tell you how to execute the attack properly, and that's half the battle. So if you don't know how to pull it off properly, you only know how to get there, it doesn't really help you a ton. In today's video, I really want to take a moment to explain in depth, but briefly, an advanced TLDR of why things are the way they are and how we do them properly, what the benefits are, pros, cons, alternative ways, stuff like that. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who commented on my Reddit post for suggestions. I'm so thankful for that, and I hope I can address them all properly to the limit and explain everything as best I can. Whoa, clothing change! I shot this video over a couple days. I also just want to say a lot of this is rambling. I try my best. Some of these questions, I'm happy to answer them without specifics. It kind of gets a bit vague, and I appreciate you all sticking around for the ride. I truly do try my best to answer everything as you've asked, and I want to continue to do this series. I have a bunch of topics I want to talk about myself that I've written down on my whiteboard behind me, that I'm going to go over in future videos, but for now, this one's going to be strictly about all of the questions you guys asked me, and I want to answer them the best of my abilities. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Hope you learned something. All right, so our first question today comes from Old Lady Zerg. Please take the time and pause and read it if you want. I'm just going to try and keep this video short. She basically asks, how do I use swarm hosts versus mech? She hasn't had much luck with them. She's watched some videos, and she's just unsure as to how to utilize the swarm host. So let's just jump right into it. So we've loaded into a custom game. I've made a bunch of swarm hosts already. Let's talk about it really quick. First off, swarm hosts are great against mech for three big reasons. Mech is slow, it's its biggest weakness, and swarm hosts exploit that because it's difficult to get away from them. Two, it's also great to trade with swarm hosts because locusts are free units. Trading with mech is incredibly hard to trade efficiently, and if it goes to the extreme late game in the war of attrition, unless you got an extra base on your opponent and the map is mined out, they'll likely just win purely due to the fact that you've bled out more resources than he has. You've been less efficient because it's incredibly hard to do so while playing versus mech. The third reason that they're great is that they're amazing for harassment. And harassing a mech player in the late game is difficult to do because they always have tons of turrets, planetaries, ling run-bys just aren't going to cut it anymore. Locusts are free again, so you can be cost efficient. Doesn't matter what you pick away, you're picking it away from a free unit. Even if you only got 1 or 2 missile turrets, that is still something. You've just taken away 200 resources that he invested into those turrets for nothing. So as long as you keep your swarm hosts alive, it is always well worth it. Free units are amazing. So we can use them in 2 main ways. 1 is offensively and 2 is defensively. So first, let's talk about offensively. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can, swarm hosts move decently fast on creep. They're not super fast, but they're quick enough. But once we get off creep, they do slow down a bit. So if your opponent has 0 map vision and you have map control, you can walk them across the map, and you can use them to launch locusts in the main base. You can go for the natural, pick a target, and go for it. The way we micro locusts, so they don't automatically... If, let's say, I want to harass the main base, and I want to send a locust wave in here, but there's a missile turret right here. If we just launch the locusts, likely they'll see that missile turret, and all of them will fall from the sky immediately and jump onto that turret. That sucks. So how we do it is when we launch them, as soon as they pop, control-click 1, so we get them all. And then we just manually control them, and whatever we want to attack, attack. That's it. So we can always run them across the map like this, and as soon as they launch the locusts, we just walk back. The other option, which is always the safer option, is if we have the ability to invest in a Nidus Worm, launch, Control click, whatever you want to attack, and back into the Night Swarm you go. Safe. We got them in, we got them out, we did some harassment. That is how we use them offensively. Defensively, little bit different, but kind of the same concept. Specifically versus mech, what we want to do is if there's two things we can do with them. If they do get that siege up position, and that deadly siege position where they've got all of their tanks sieged up, split apart, their Thors are in position, their Hellbats, their battle cruisers, their Liberators, whatever their style of mech that they're playing, if they get that position, we all know how notoriously hard it is to break that position. And if it's all the way back here, we don't need to do anything about that because we're not under any sort of imminent threat. But as soon as they start inching forward and they get to here, all of a sudden these two bases are pressured, we have to do something about that. But in most cases, if the Terran gets that perfect siege up, they're actually kind of banking on you trying to break it because they know you are going to lose way more than they will by trying to break it. And once you've thrown away your army to take away half of their army supply, they're just going to reinforce and siege up closer and closer, and they are going to bleed you dry. It is frustrating. Swarm hosts play a huge role in breaking that siege position. So how we're going to do this is, how many swarm hosts do I have here? So I've got 18 swarm hosts here. It's kind of crucial. If you don't have the micro to do so, just launch them all at once. But if you do, just hear me out. We have 18 here. Let's save 5. So we're going to launch 13, pretending that there's a siege position here. These locusts go in, and what we're trying to do is we are trying to break the tank line. If we can break the tank line, we can go in with our roaches and hydras and we can clean up the rest. But the fact that they've got 10, 12 or more tanks sieged up in that good position where they're all spread apart, so it's easy, or it's difficult for us to pick them away, and it's easy for those tanks to just maximize their damage output. Those locusts are going in, we're going to break the tanks, therefore the rest of our units can come in and clean up the Thors and whatever else they have. Here's the one thing that I do want to note though. If you launch those locusts in and they unsiege all of their tanks, it doesn't matter what the locusts are doing. If they unsiege everything, we are taking the rest of our army and we are moving up to fight with those locusts because everything's unsieged, and this is where we can get a huge amount of damage done. However, if they don't unsiege, get as much value out of those locusts as you can before we commit to the next step. And by saving these couple swarm hosts, those 5 swarm hosts, that automatically buys us a little bit more of a safety net, because one of the biggest weaknesses to swarm hosts is their cooldown and the fact that they do nothing but eat supply when they are on cooldown. Each one of these little hell muffins is 3 supply each, and if they are on cooldown, they don't even have an auto attack. They are absolutely useless. And how long is the cooldown, you ask? Well, 43 seconds. So if we launch them all and we don't have any locusts available, and it didn't do much, we are in a very bad spot for 43 seconds. So saving a couple is always a good idea, because if your first wave didn't get a lot done and they start unsieging some units to try and advance that siege position forward, we at least have the ability to pressure it a little bit more. Obviously, we want to get Vipers in, but that's a different story. That is essentially the TLDR advanced version of how we use swarm hosts. There's only one more thing I want to cover really quickly about them, and for that, we're going to jump into the unit tester. All right, so we're over here in the unit editor. I just wanted to point this out. So this right here is a pretty dangerous siege line, right? There's multiple tanks covering all angles. It's going to be so cost inefficient and difficult to break this with like a pure Roach Hydra ground-based army. Once Vipers come into play, different story, but we're talking specifically about swarm hosts. And this is the kind of position they excel in. So by just simply launching the locusts, the key to remember is everything we get, as long as we keep these swarm hosts alive, is free value, because locusts don't cost anything. So we can simply launch the locusts, control click them, and attack move on whatever. We're going to pick away some tanks, get a Thor or 2. Fantastic. That was all free. Here's where they don't work out that well. Here's where things don't start to work out so well for us. So one of the biggest and easiest ways to counter swarm host locusts from the Terran player is the Hellion or Hellbat. They both do great, but the Hellbat does a little bit better because they're tankier. The Hellbat is the mech's version of a Zergling. They don't cost any gas, so they are incredibly expendable. They are just a simple filler unit. Once you see a mech player going for mass Hellbat or something like that to counter the locusts, essentially we want to start trading them out. We don't have to kill them all. We can keep a couple for, again, harassment purposes, but in terms of being part of our fighting army, they're no longer going to get much value done, and they're eating a huge chunk of our supply. So we do want to trade them out. And just to demonstrate what I mean, we're going to attack the Hellbats. They kind of get destroyed. So at this point, once you start seeing these many Hellbats, you know, he's starting to get quite a few. Maybe normally mech players have 1 to 2 factories on a reactor, the rest are on tech labs. Maybe he might put another reactor and start pumping out Hellbats and Hellions to deal with these locust waves. That's when we want to say, hey, if I've got 18 swarm hosts, I'm going to trade them out, maybe cut down to 6 or 7, and then just use those purely for harassment, but I need to get the supply back from these swarm hosts so I can actually have a better standing army. That is the TLDR version of swarm host versus mech. It is a very different playstyle. One more thing I do want to mention is you do want to be active with swarm hosts. You also need to have map vision. Because it's a different playstyle, all of your supply really is tied up into these swarm hosts. So you do need to be active with them because you can't sit back because this is your army, right? You need to be harassing with them. And on the defense, you need to have map vision because you need to know where to get your swarm hosts in time when the Terran player is moving across the map with their mech army so they are in position, ready to launch as soon as the tanks start sieging up. Because once they start sieging, it is a long animation. So if this tank is not sieged like it is now, and it's just moving, and it sieges up, you launch the locusts right now. See how long it takes for it to unsiege before it can even move again? They're going to die. So if we can get good map vision to always have our swarm hosts in place on the defense, great. That is how we need to do it. And on the offense, we just need to get as much value out of it as we can. If we sit at home with this many swarm hosts and we never do anything with them, we never try and harass or anything, we've invested all of this money, all of this supply into a unit that we're going to launch once, and hopefully it does some stuff, but it's no longer cost efficient. You know, if we spawn a swarm host and it dies immediately, that's money down the drain. If we have a bunch of swarm hosts and we aren't using them, that is, again, just pretty much money down the drain because swarm hosts are incredibly powerful units once they're abused. They just need to be active. That is it. Moving on to our next question. Our second question comes from Kristen Jensen. He loves the community, and we love you. His question is, he wants to know what role each unit plays. So he mentions here how Vibe said when you're playing a Ling Bane style, you want to hurt their economy and avoid big confrontations. That's absolutely true. There's other ways to play Ling Bane, but that is a very good way to look at it. But as a relatively green Zerg player myself, it was eye-opening to think of something like that, and compositions have purposes. Does a Roach army serve any certain purpose, for instance? Yes. A Roach army serves as a very powerful early game defense and a very powerful mid-game army. Roaches are fantastic for the early and mid-game because they are beefy and they do a decent amount of damage. They're also relatively cheap. The downside of Roaches, when you get to the late game, they are very, if not the most supply inefficient unit in the game. Because they are 2 supply each, in the late game, their DPS is just nowhere near good enough to, you know, compensate for that 2 supply. So they really, really fall off in the late game. But essentially, the purpose for a Roach-based army is early game defense and mid game defense or aggression. You're not thinking late game Roaches. You just aren't. He also wants to know when to push with my army and the primary targets should be. That is a bit of a difficult question to answer. First off, it's going to be really difficult to show any videos for this first question. I would absolutely love to explain everything to you. I just need to know specifics. It would just take me a very long time to go over absolutely everything in this video right now, and I apologize for that. But anything you want to know specifically, let me know. I will go over it in depth. But to a degree, Lingbane is about hurting the economy. Lingbane is very, very powerful, but it's also, how do I say this? If you remember like playing Pokemon on the Game Boy years ago, you know, I'm talking like the original Pokemon Red and Blue. There was lots of moves that you would do that do a lot of damage, but they also do some damage to you, a back blow, stuff like that. I remember one of them being like headbutt, and you know, you do this crazy amount of damage, but you'd also suffer some recoil damage. That is what Lingbane is. It blows up anything in its way. And believe me, enough Banelings will destroy anything on the ground. I don't care if it's a pure Thor, pure Immortal army. Enough Banelings will kill it. However, Banelings cost a lot of money, and they kill themselves when they kill other units. So you have to constantly replenish them, which is expensive over time. It really is. Now, when you get good Baneling connects, it's so cost efficient. It really is. But to be constantly throwing away Banelings, you do have to have a good economy behind it. That's where killing your opponent's economy comes into play. If you can slow down their economy, you can justify spending more and more of your economy on Banelings to just constantly keep putting them down and bringing yourself up. One thing I do want to say about Baneling army, though, no matter what kind of composition you are playing, and I've seen this from far too many Zergs, it is just something that until you get high enough to realize, it's kind of a mental barrier. So if you are playing Lingbane Hydra, Lingbane Ravager, Lingbane Muta, whatever, you do need some sort of unit to support Lingbane. Now you can play pure Lingbane into Ultra, for example, versus Terran. That used to be a very popular style, but nowadays it's not as popular. It's a little bit more exploitable. So you typically want some sort of supporting unit. And the meta right now seems to be Lingbane Hydra into Lingbane Hydra Lurker. Lurkers are incredibly powerful versus bio. They are not incredibly powerful versus mech. I mean, they do a lot of damage to mech units, don't get me wrong, but the fact that they're going to mass siege tanks kind of really makes Lurker play difficult and not always efficient. My point being, no matter what kind of style you are playing with Lingbane, Lingbane is the damage. And I can't stress that enough. There are so many people who send me replays who play Lingbane Hydra and focus purely on Hydra upgrades, as if the Hydras are the damage and the Lingbane is to support the Hydras, when in fact it is completely the other way around. The Hydras are there to support the Lingbane, and the Lingbane is the damage. Therefore, if you're going to play Lingbane anything, you are prioritizing melee upgrades, not ranged. I wish I could kind of go more in depth with this question, but I'm going to leave it at that. Thanks for commenting. I really appreciate it. Our next question comes from ARW_StarCraft. I don't understand ZvP, he says. What are some fun ways to approach the matchup without queen walking? Well, there's lots of different ways to approach this matchup without just queen walking. Queen walking is an incredibly powerful strategy. However, it's already been figured out, and over time, it will eventually be something that is still useful. I truthfully don't think any real build gets put up on the shelf and gathers dust forever. Once something becomes meta, it's very powerful, but the more common it is, the more quickly it will be figured out, and the more quickly it will be shut down in its tracks. Then it kind of falls out of favor for a while, and something else will pop up and be meta. However, that original build is never going to be useful. It's something you can always throw in as a surprise factor, and you can catch people off guard. Take, for example, the Archon drop. Used to be absolutely meta in Protoss versus Zerg. All the time, Archon drops. Until Zergs figured out, hey, you know what? If I drop an early enough Roach Warden, get a couple of Roaches and a handful of Queens to poke away at the Warp Prism and the Roaches to deal with the Archons, I'm just fine. All of a sudden, Archon drop kind of started falling out of the meta, but I guarantee you now, if a Protoss player threw that into, let's say, a best of 3 or a best of 5, you could catch that Zerg opponent off guard. It will work. Queen walking is eventually going to be that at some point, but for the time being, yes, it is very, very powerful. But it's not the only way to approach the matchup. Playing PvZ or ZvP in this case is incredibly MMR dependent. It really depends on what kind of league you're in. Because if you are, let's say, platinum and below, there's a very good chance that Protoss player is going to make a single Zealot or a single Adept to plug the hole in their wall and rush straight into a couple Void Rays and then pure Carrier and nothing else. Because they know most of their Zerg opponents do not have what it takes to defeat pure Carrier. As we start to get higher and higher, Protoss players will realize, hey, I can't just rush straight to Carrier. It rarely works. You know, I die to Hydra timings and all Queen walks and all that stuff. So that is a bit of a difficult one. But how do we approach the match? That's a great question. Realistically, it kind of goes back and forth. As I kind of said down here, I don't know if you're reading it or not, but it goes back and forth. The Zerg initially dictates how the game is played out because the Protoss player is going to take the first probe that they create out of the Nexus. It's going to go down. It's going to put a pylon at the low ground so they can create their wall to defend their natural. And then it's immediately going across the map to hatch block and also to scout for a 12 pool. That is where the Zerg player initially dictates the flow of the game. Because if there's a 12 pool involved, the Protoss player now has to adjust his build and accommodate for the fact that there is going to be super early aggression. Meaning typically drop a second gateway and delay their nexus so they can chrono out 2 zealots and an adept to hold. If there's no 12 pool, then the ebb and flow gets shifted to the Protoss player. How are they going to open up? If it's standard so far, now it's on the Zerg player to figure out what kind of tech they're opening with. Are they opening with a Robo? Are they opening with a Twilight? Are they opening up with a Stargate? From there, that will be the dictation of the game, where we're going next, because we have to respond to each 3 techs differently. If they open up Twilight, okay, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a Glaive Adept build. But what if it's straight to charge? What if it's Blink all in, right? What if it's DTs? We don't know. We have to figure that out. If they open up Robo, 9 times out of 10, it means aggression, and it typically means 2 base, so be wary of that. The only big exception to that I can think of off the top of my head is Archon drop. That is also a possibility, but we can scout that because we're going to see Twilight into Robo, not Robo into Twilight. So pure Robo, likely aggression. Stargate, again, can be a bit confusing. Are they going to mass Void Rays and go straight into Carriers? Are they going to play with some Oracles? Are they going to go Phoenix play? This is where the Protoss starts to dictate the game. In the mid-game, the focus shifts back to the Zerg. Because if you can deflect whatever the Protoss is going to open up with for harassment purposes, now it's on you. You are now controlling this game. Do you want to go all in? Do you want to be aggressive? Do you want to play a macro game? And the Protoss player has to respond to you, and it goes back and forth. That's kind of the ebb and flow. That's the standard Zerg versus Protoss. So he says here he likes to play a Hydra Lurker based composition, but he feels like it's really weak versus Sky Toss splash damage. It can be, right? It's difficult. So when we're talking about Hydras versus Carriers, there's kind of a magic number for Carriers with Protoss, and that number is 6. Once they get to 6 or more Carriers, that's when it's going to become difficult to start dealing with them cost efficiently with Hydras. Now, if we've contained our opponent on 2 to 3 bases and haven't let them expand anymore, and we're 15 minutes into the game and we've got 6 or 7 bases, absolutely, we can kind of be a little bit less efficient. It doesn't matter that much. But we still do have to be careful because if we lose all our army at once, we're kind of boned. So back to the main question. He doesn't understand it. And I hope that explanation gave you a bit more insight as to how the matchup works. We're each responding to each other at certain points in the game. And then when it gets to the extreme late game, you can bank on the Protoss player playing Carrier, High Templar, maybe a couple Disruptors if there's got lots of Lurkers, maybe a couple Immortals, but the main source of damage from their army is going to be Carrier, High Templar, Storm. That's just their strongest unit comp in the late game, truthfully. And what we're going to play late game, unfortunately, involves quite a bit of Spellcasters and a lot of Spore Crawlers. In the late game, Spore Crawlers become part of our army. And, how many? More. You've already got 30, that's okay, make more. You need a lot of spores because spores deal with interceptors really well. And if you can kill off interceptors, then Carriers are just floating useless blobs. And especially if it's a scrappy game and you're working on low economy, Carriers can hurt the Protoss way more than a lot of Protosses understand. Each interceptor is a lot, I think it's 10 minerals each. It's 5 or 10. I can't remember the last patch. I don't play Protoss all that often. However, that's money down the bank for every interceptor killed, right? Spores help with that a lot. That's just the late game. That's what we're going to be moving into, right? We are typically going to be playing spores, broods, corruptors, infestors for fungal growth, as well as vipers for abduct. And parasitic bomb is helpful as well too. Yeah, let's talk about different ways to approach it. Now, in terms of different ways to approach this matchup, I would say this is a very vague question, right? It's difficult because I would need to know your play styles, if you're an aggressive player, a cheesy player, a macro player, what you like to do. So for the purpose of just trying to help you out and keep the video as short as I can, I'm going to link a couple Zerg versus Protoss builds that I personally like down below. Check them out, try them out, tell me, good, bad, worked, didn't, you like it, you don't, and I'll help you from there and we'll adjust. We'll go forward. Thank you for submitting this. I really do appreciate it. So our next question comes from Creed. He wants to know 2 things. What are map features? How do they work? How can we take advantage of them? And then he wants to know about army movement. How we're going to move our armies, danger zones, where to move my army based on my opponents, when to attack, when to pull back. First off, great questions. Let's start with map features. This one, I'm going to speak more broadly. I do have examples prepared, but keep in mind, different play styles can benefit from different things. So this is a very generalized way to put it. So generally speaking, you'll hear usually this is a Terran map or this is a Zerg map. Rarely do you hear this is a Protoss map because no, I don't want to piss off any Protoss players, but they're just able to change their play styles a bit more freely than Zerg or Terran, depending on the maps themselves. If it's more of a Terran-esque map, they can kind of do a 2-base all-in somewhat, and if it's more of a Zerg-based map, they can really play a macro game, get into their sky toss. Protoss can approach maps just a bit differently than Terran and Zerg can. So, different things in the maps benefit different races, play styles differently. Some of these things, they include rush distance, how spaced out the bases are. Is there breakable rocks? Can we open up new paths? Is that something you have to worry about? The amount of bases, how close together the bases are. Stuff like this. So for a really broad example, maps with a lot of chokes and narrow areas, they benefit Terran players more. Usually because of siege tanks, positions like that, and it's very difficult for you to get a full surround of the Terran army, which is how you ideally want to trade as Zerg at all times. You want to come in from multiple angles. If you've ever played a Terran player and you only come in from one angle and you fight them head on and they've got tanks, marauders in the front line to soak the banelings, the marines already pre-split, you'll find out really quickly how much that sucks. But if you come in from the front, the back, the left, the right, and you swarm them from all angles, holy shit, does that trade ever get way, way better. So yes, generally speaking, lots of chokes, walls, angles, and stuff like that, very much so Terran favored. Where the complete opposite is true for Zerg. So things that benefit Zerg, lots of bases, first off, lots of wide open spaces so you can get that surround. In terms of distance between bases, when bases are really closely knit together, that really helps Zerg too, because it helps you establish those bases to get your economy up and running. If bases are really far apart and spread apart, it makes it a lot more difficult and you can be abused a lot more by drop play. So that's kind of, the broad generalization of it. So the first map I want to talk about for Terran favored is Beckett Industries, because it's recent. It's something it's still in the map pool for whatever reason, regardless of the fact that they apparently patched it out. But here's why it's Terran favored and why most Zergs don't play this map. First off, there's lots of chokes in this map. There's lots of walls. If you can see, right here at the third base, they can position tanks in here, and it's this tiny little choke, right? Makes it very difficult for you to attack into, as well as there's no easy way to get behind to come in from this angle. The only way you could do that is to run all the way around where there's already a choke because of these stupid rocks, get in right by their natural, which they likely already have units there too. So we're going to bleed off a bunch of units just trying to get that surround. it makes it stupidly difficult for a Zerg player, and it's frustrating. As well as holding a fifth base on this map is difficult. As you can see, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're all pretty closely knit. However, it doesn't matter if you want to take the bottom fifth, or I guess I should do on this side because my webcam's blocking it. So it doesn't matter if you want to take this as a fifth, or this one way over here, down here, which will be over here, up here. The distance between them is pretty difficult. Like, this is a big distance. So it's easy to abuse stuff like that. With the map as it is, it just makes it really difficult to trade efficiently versus a Terran player. Therefore, it makes it a Terran map. Especially if this goes to the late game, likely you've taken a number of less than ideal trades, and he's just going to win the war of attrition. So, kind of sucks. On the flip side, this is World of Sleepers. And holy balls did I ever love this map. This is arguably one of the most Zerg favored maps I can think of in quite some time. What makes this map so Zerg favored is how close together the bases are. The amount of them, the long rush distance from main to main, wide open spaces, allowing you to come in from lots of different angles. Like, these platforms are really big. This is quite a big area. It makes it super easy to get that full 360 surround coming from all angles and just get the maximum amount of DPS output during engagements as possible. It really, really makes a difference. So this is a Zerg map, and I miss this map a lot. I really do. I'm getting a lot of nostalgia just looking at it. So yeah, that's question 1 in a nutshell. That's map features. Let's move on to number 2. All right, now for the second question, army movement. So we're going to go through it in the order that you asked it. So why is it good to move armies in certain ways? Well, this depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So let's say you opened up pool first. You want to deny the natural low ground CC of your Terran opponent. Well, it's much less beneficial to run the Lings straight down the map in the main rush distance like this, because they're going to be met by the Reaper and picked off, and you've accomplished nothing. That sucks. So the better way to do it would be to send them around. You know, it'll take a bit longer, yes, but they're not going to be met by the Reaper. They're going to show up, kill the SCV, and successfully delay the low ground command center. That is what you want to do. That is an example of how to move your army in a certain way. Now, this isn't the only situation, but, you know, that's an example for one. So another example is, let's say you're moving out with an all-in, or maybe a big chunk of your army. Depending on your unit comp, let's say we're playing Lingbane, Hydra versus Bio in this example, okay? We ideally want to avoid narrow areas. I'm sorry, I'm playing against a very easy AI because I have a lot of things set up so I can show you in this game, but he is just relentlessly attacking. There we go. Go back home for a bit. I'm going to take a parasitic bomb with you. Okay, so what we want to do in this situation, again, we're playing Lingbane Hydra versus Bio. We want to avoid chokes. So we don't want to fight. There's not a lot of chokes on this map, but we just don't want to we don't want to move anywhere where there's small, narrow pathways, because if we meet our opponent there, we are fucked. We are handing them our army. It's not a good spot. We just want to stick to these wide open areas. So that way we can move, we can split our army up a bit. We can get that full surround, stuff like that. So that is, in a nutshell, good ways to move certain army comps. You know, in reality, if we're looking to end the game, straight down the map, let's go. If we're looking for harassment, try and take the least scoutable way. You know, it depends on what we're doing. And I wish I could be a lot more specific, but I would need examples to give you concrete terms. So next up, how am I supposed to be moving around the map? Well, a lot of what I just said applies to this too, but again, it depends on what you really want to accomplish. With more vision comes easier decisions. If you want to harass and do run-bys, you ideally want to move in the least likely scouted paths, meaning running around the main rush distance, hitting where the least defenses in place are. Things like Overlords scouting, Changelings, like couple Lings just running by to scout, nothing else. These are things that really help you decide, hey, there's not a lot of defenses here. That gives you the information so that you know what you want to accomplish a lot easier. If you want to take a big engagement, possibly end the game, how do you want to move around the map? Straight down the middle, brother. Get it done. But again, this is difficult to explain without specifics. I hope this helped a little bit, but you know, I'm sorry. Next up, you asked areas a certain army comps excel at. Basically, Ling Bane styles excel in wide open spaces. Lurker broodlords, they tend to excel in a little bit more narrow areas, especially if you have high ground involved. So this is what I mean. Let's just get rid of these and get rid of this so that we just have these. So this kind of army excels in these areas. Let's see how much room there is. It's so wide because we can split up some of our Ling Bane. And let's say he's coming in from here, right? Well, we'll take a couple of these units and we're going to position them here. Now, as he moves through these bushes, we have got army coming in from this way, this way, this way, and this way. We're going to get the full surround. So as he starts to push through, the rear ones start to move up forward. Then we can select them all. And without even trying, we've come in from all angles. This is where Ling Bane excels at. And I don't have any lurkers on me right now, but lurkers would excel by hiding behind these positions, right? As they're forced through. This is not a massive choke, to be honest, but World of Sleeper doesn't have a lot of chokes. You know, this is somewhat of a choke. They have to come through here if they want to push through here. Therefore, lurkers, broodlords, it gives them a narrow area where the lurkers can shoot and hit a bunch of stuff at once rather than being really spread out. And the lurkers are, sorry, the broodlords, when the broodlings shoot, they're all clumped up and they get a lot of damage done. This is where a lot of this stuff excels. Oh my god, this stupid Terran, very easy AI. Okay, so danger zones. As I kind of explained above, you know, you don't want to fight into chokes. You don't want to fight head on. You know, you want to come in from multiple angles. Fighting into high ground without high ground vision, stuff like that. That is danger zones to me. And I'm just going to leave it at that. When to attack. This is, again, difficult to explain without specifics. But I do want to try and give you something to go off of. Generally speaking, once your economy is up and running, you're sitting at like 70 drones or more, you want to be harassing a lot. Keeping your opponent on their toes is very important. You don't really want to give them the opportunity to freely, especially like a Bio-Terran player, you don't want to give them the ability to freely micro their army on your side of the map without any repercussions. If you're not doing anything to them while they're harassing and attacking you, they're free to, you know, marine split, get all of their micro techniques down and take the best trade they possibly can. You need to be harassing them. If they're attacking you, you're attacking them. Even if you don't get much damage done with these Ling Run buys, you're splitting their attention. And that gives you a very good opportunity to get us around, to get those juicy Baneling connects, to clean up their army and your side of the map. So stuff like that, once we're at a healthy economy, we always want to be harassing. You know, until you get better at multitasking, in reality, you can just queue up a bunch of Lings just like this and just say, you know what, I want to do a Ling Run buy. There is 32 Zerglings, right? I'm not even going to hotkey them. I'm not going to do anything to them. I'm just going to rally them over here, and I'm just going to forget about them. They're going to run as soon as they pop over there, and they're going to get whatever damage they get done. They will get some damage done, but even if they get very minimal damage done, we are constantly splitting our opponent's attention and keeping them on their toes. This is huge. In terms of, like, if you want to take a big attack, again, it just depends on the situation. See, I'm not microing them. They're getting damage done. If you want to attack, when are we going to attack? Do you think are you maxed out? Are you in a good position? Do you have good enough map vision? Go ahead, attack. It's not always a good idea unless you're trying to end the game to attack with your entire army. You do want to have some stuff at home for defense, because if you move out and you've got absolutely nothing at home and they're harassing you, you can be caught with your pants down. That kind of sucks because they likely are moving out with a decent chunk of army, but they still have defenses at home. So the defenses are dealing with your army and you've got nothing at home to defend their harassment. That sucks. So in terms of a big attack, trust your gut, man. if you want to go all in, you want to end the game, attack then. Otherwise, the goal of a Zerg player, realistically, until we get maxed out and until we get to the late game, is to be reactive. We want to be harassing, we want to keep their economy low, but we just want to be able to deflect anything. And there's another, in that comes another point, when to attack. If you absolutely crush and clean up one of their attacks, straight down the map, brother. Kill them, destroy them. And then finally, when to pull back. And this one is difficult to explain too. But I'm going to boil it down, just because this one's been going on for a while, to really two things. If you start a fight and you're in a bad spot, pull back. If you start a fight and you rapidly drop in supply and you have the ability to salvage what's left, pull back. Always trust your gut. Even if it was the right thing to do and you should have attacked, trust your gut in those situations. If your gut says don't attack, don't. And I did skip one here. How to identify where to move my army based on my opponents. This is why I went through all this trouble right here. So I started this game. I neural parasited an SCV so I could build a command center, purely so I could build a sensor tower. Terran has two real ways to scout, other than having idle Marines on the map and stuff. They can scan, and they have sensor towers. And you might think sensor towers are OP. They give you a heads up of anything coming in the area. It's true. They're also expensive. And you know what's free? Creep tumors. You know what's better? Creep tumors. Why? Because they give you full vision. A sensor tower doesn't reveal this area to me. It just reveals in a red dot that there's an enemy unit in there. This SCV is going to go through it. And yes, I do have creep vision, but all this sensor tower is doing is showing me, hey, there's a dot here. Creep tumors give me full map vision. This is huge. So in terms of defense, where do we want to move our army in terms of our opponents? Where they're going. If we're constantly being surprise attacked and, we didn't see anything coming and all of a sudden a Terran player's on our third and, they've got tanks and Marines and stuff, we had no idea it was coming, we have very poor map vision, and that's something we need to correct. Obviously, creep spread is huge. Creep spread's going to help. But until you get better at creep spread, there's a lot of different ways we can do this. First off, we can blindly send overlords in wherever we want. Doesn't matter if they get picked off, especially like outside of the very early game. It really doesn't matter if we lose an overlord. We can replace it. If that gives us the heads up that, hey, look, my overlord died and this is where the Terran army is coming from, that was well worth the overlord sacrifice. Then we can also do this. We can not hotkey a Zergling, so that as long as we stop using F2, it'll never move, and we put it on hold position. Now, if this Ling dies, we know this is where they're coming from. Other things we can use, changelings. We can also just, if there's Zelnaga towers, take those. We can also just take a small group of Lings, and we can just split them apart and run them around and just shift-click movement commands just to see what's going on. Offensively, we want to move where their army isn't, with a handful of Lings and Banes or whatever we want to do harassment. Defensively, Zerg is a reactive race. We need to have as much map vision as we possibly can, and we never want to be taken off guard. We should know where the Terran... We're not going to know the second they move out always, but we should know by the time they hit halfway across the map where their army is coming from. Otherwise, we just don't have the map vision we need to play Zerg appropriately. You don't want to play in the blind. Now, this one's been going for quite a while, so I hope this helped a bit. We're going to move on. All right, so our next question comes to us from Food Guy. I'd like to have an explanation on what unit comps you should be building and why these unit comps are good. As a bonus, how to properly control these unit comps. So he says, for example, in ZvT, the meta is Lingbane Muta or Lingbane Hydra, which it is. I know I should be building these units, but once I get them, how can I effectively use them since A move only gets you so far? Absolutely it does. Setting up flanks? Absolutely. How many? 2, 3, 4? Depends on the situation, but we'll talk about that. And he also doesn't get ZvP unit composition due to the Void Ray buff. Always felt bad. So let's talk about this. First off, why are we building what army comp? Well, we need to identify, I'm going to turn the music off on this, what our opponent's doing. If they're playing bio, specifically with Terran for this first part, if they're playing bio, we do want to play Lingbane Hydra or Lingbane Muta. The reason being, roaches trade well with bio at 0-0. They do okay at 1-1, but once 2-2 hits, that's when Marine Marauder heavily outtrade Roach Ravager, and it gets abysmally bad. And when 3/3 hits, whew, roaches are hot garbage. So we make Lingbane Muta because we can get much better trades, or Lingbane Hydra. Then if we scout, they're not going bio, hey, they're going mech. That's when we want to start playing roaches, because roaches play a lot better versus mech, because the first handful of the game is going to be heavily Hellion based. That they're going to be constantly doing Hellion harassment, trying to pick off drones, trying to slow down your economy so they can build their army up, because it takes a while to get to a full mech army. That's why roaches come into play, because inevitably roaches trade much better versus Hellions, stuff like that. So that's why we build certain army comps. And most Zergs, and as a general rule of thumb, if you are a macro Zerg player, you are responding and playing reactively to what your opponent is doing. We are building an army comp based around what our opponent is doing, and that's just the nature of the beast. Now, how do we control these armies? You're right, a move only does get you so far. Thankfully, Zerg Micro, you know, you can do a lot with Zerg Micro, and you can, the higher up you get, the more comfortable you get with multitasking, the better you become as a player. There are lots of things you can do. But let's keep it simple, and in reality, there's two things I want you to focus on. That is it. First thing is always coming in from multiple angles. You don't want to face something, you don't want to fight something head on. You don't want to come in from only one angle. That puts you at a huge disadvantage, because a lot of banelings are going to get sniped off before they have any chance to connect. And the Terran player is going to have a much easier time to micro their units and avoid, you know, marine splits, avoid these baneling connections. That sucks. So we want to come in from multiple angles. It makes it much more difficult for the Terran to marine split, to micro, makes it much easier to get these juicy baneling connections. And with the links around, they're not going anywhere. The banelings are coming and they're going to hit. It's just so much easier. And the second thing, the second micro trick I want to teach you is we're going to A-move with our army, coming in from multiple angles when we set up those flanks, so we can come in at least 2 or more. You know what? 2 is okay, but 3 or 4 is better. But depending on what the map, depending where you're fighting, at least 2. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to A-move with the chunk of our army, and then we are going to control-click our banelings, and we want to use them not on attack move, rather move command. If we leave our banelings on attack move, they're going to blow up on the first marine they see, and they might get some splash damage. You know, it is what it is. If we don't use them on attack move, rather we control click them so we can manually control them, and we move command them into the pack of marines as deep as they go, those marines are going to kill the banelings anyway. And if they don't, we're now deeper into the marine pack, and then we can attack move. Therefore, we're getting much more splash damage. We're getting way more surface area for that splash to go off, getting much more value out of that baneling. That, in reality, is how we use them. Coming in from multiple angles and trying to control what your banelings connect on. If we have an abundance of Lingbane, it really doesn't matter. Sure, you can connect onto Archons or Marauders or Thors or whatever if you want. But if we don't, in most cases you really shouldn't if you want to try and be as effective as possible, we just want our banelings connecting on the proper targets. So versus Terran, we want them connecting on the Marines. Versus Protoss, we want them connecting on the Stalkers and the Zealots, or the Adepts if they're still using Adepts for some reason. Stuff like that. That is essentially your first question in a nutshell. All right, so on to the second question. ZvP Unit Compositions. Well, I mean, there's like 2 real styles of playing ZvP at the moment. You can either play Hydra Roach into Lurker, or you can play Hydra Lingbane into Lurker. I mean, you can also play Ravager Lingbane if you want, but that's... it's a bit more advanced. It has its niches. It works really well against like heavy sentry comps, but depending on your MMR, you might not even see sentries for force fields for quite some time. So I would stick purely with Hydra Roach or Hydra Lingbane. Hydra Roach is probably going to be the easier one to pull off, and then you're looking to get into Lurkers. Lurkers are always going to be valuable, even the extreme late game when they have carriers, because they're going to have High Templar with those carriers. Otherwise, Corruptors, pure Corruptor would be pure carrier any day. So the Lurkers, especially with Lurker range, outrange High Templars and are very easy to snipe High Templars off. So yeah, in terms of army composition, there's a few different ways to do it, but I would just highly recommend Hydra Roach. All right. Hopefully this helped. Thank you for submitting. Our next question comes to us from Yeast, and this is one of the most fantastic questions I've ever read because I genuinely don't know the answer. He asks, when is it the best time to get burrow? What situations call for it? What influences the decision to invest in upgrading burrow in ZvT and ZvP? Great question. Now, in a long macro game, I'm always going to get burrow. One of the main reasons I get it versus Terran, I love baneling landmines. I abuse the shit out of baneling landmines. It's one of my absolute favorite things to do in this game. There is no better feeling than watching a chunk of Marines walk over and unexpectedly just... And when the Terran gets salty at me, I say, oh, so you like Widow Mines? Too. Just mine can be a bit better. That's why I get it. And the second reason I get it is I love, especially when we're getting into the later game, I love burrowing lings at the faraway bases so I know when they're taken. In terms of when to get it, I actually don't know. What influences my decision personally to get burrow? When I know it's going to be a macro game and I'm either maxed out and I've got extra gas, or I'm worried that I don't have the greatest map vision, so I'm going to get burrow then, and I still justifyingly so that I have the resources and the gas available that, if I've got like 200 gas, and no, I don't want to get burrow yet, especially like early mid game. But late game, you typically, once you're maxed out, you just start to build a bank, and it's not all that expensive. That 100 gas can be well worth it for the map vision. And even if, one baneling landmine connects, that's, in my opinion, well worth it. But I actually don't know when the appropriate time to get burrow is. The best answer I can give you is once things start moving past the mid game into the late game, get it. Just get it, because you will find uses for it. The only time I've seen burrow be a prominent feature is in the Florencio burrow rush versus Protoss, where he opens up he doesn't even make a drone. As soon as the game starts, 2 drones are pulled because you start off the game with 50 minerals, and he immediately makes 2 fucking gas geysers, gets to 100 gas immediately, sends a drone across the map, and just patrol moves it to block their natural while he's getting burrow, and by like 2 minutes, he just burrows a drone, and they force the Protoss player to either get an Oracle if they went Stargate or into Robo. But that is the only situation where I can think that burrow was a necessary part of the composition. Great question. I wish I could give you a better answer. I'm sorry, but thank you. That is genuinely the best question I've read in a long time. So this one I really wanted to just take a moment to talk about. This one comes from 100 Meter Man. And if you read it, he's, a Masters 3 to Masters 1 MMR Zerg. Basically what this boils down to is I can't do everything at once. When I focus on one thing, I lose to another. But I encourage you to read the entire thing, because what he's saying is, I don't think I'm good enough to do everything at once. When in reality is everyone is good enough to do anything. It doesn't matter what you want to do in this world. If it's, I want to be the best StarCraft player in the world, or I want to be the best piano player, or the best skateboarder, or whatever. Don't ever think that you can't do it. Some people are naturally gifted at things. Some people aren't, and they have to really work for it. But it doesn't matter, because we still have the same capabilities. We can still both achieve the same goal. But if you don't believe in yourself, it's never going to happen. This guy's already hit Masters 1. He's already well above the vast majority of people who play this game. And he's saying he's not good enough. He is good enough. He absolutely can do it, but he's down on himself. The best example I've always said 100 times is if you've ever watched any sort of fighting, UFC, boxing, whatever, you know that the pre-fight interviews are always hilariously just testosterone in your face. I'm going to fuck him up. I'm going to destroy him. That's every interview. And that's how fighters' mentalities have to be. Because if you got into the boxing ring or the octagon with the mentality of, maybe I'll win, maybe I'll lose, you've probably already lost that fight. Now, I'm not saying be arrogant. I'm not saying be a dick. But you need to be confident in yourself. You need to go into every game knowing that I have just as much chance to win as they do, as my opponent does, and I absolutely can win this game. And if you are someone who gets tilted easily, or, you get nervous or scared or ladder anxiety, Something I've told people in the past to do is once you find a game and it goes 3, 2, 1, close your eyes. Don't look. Because, you might mismatch. That happens all the time. You might match with someone who's hundreds, if not thousands of MMR or higher. And believe me, it does happen. Close your eyes. It doesn't matter. As soon as the game starts, click in the top right, see what race your opponent's playing. Go from there. So our next question comes from Mirasame112. Looks like Mira Massa, which is a song from Periphery, but I hope I pronounced that right. He has a lot to unpack here. Simple question. You can't just answer it. But I don't know how the ZvP matchup works. Well, let's try and help you out there. People do timings with Roach Hydra, get bullied by Void Rays, get Rutched by Glaive Adepts, go for Hydra Bane. How do you even have enough SP to do that? Easily. You go up to 6 gases. Go high tech comms, but I somehow never know what and when I should do it. All right. To make it easier, I think, okay, I love you for doing this. Thank you. These are the talking points. Scouting. When do I scout? There's going to be 2 crucial times, and the rest are ideal, but I guess not necessary. You should probably just do them anyway. The first scout you're going to do is your initial Overlord. As soon as the game starts, that first Overlord is going straight across the map. And because it's not Terran, there's no way for them to quickly get out, like a Marine, for example. They can't get a Stalker out immediately. They can't get anything that shoots up immediately to bully or threaten your Overlord away. So we can be a bit more lenient in that aspect. The first thing we need to do once our Overlord gets there is determine, is this normal or not normal? Normal, when your Overlord gets there, you should see a single gateway that's already completed, a cyber core that's in production, and a nexus that's in production. If you don't see that, it's abnormal, and you want to quickly figure out what's going on. And if you can't figure it out in time, my best bet for you is make an extra round of lings, which could hurt you economically, but if there is really nothing else going on, send them across the map, try to get some damage done. But yeah, knowing normal versus not normal is pretty big. The second would continue on with the first one. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. That first Overlord, once it determines if it's normal or not normal, you want to stick around to see what the initial tech is. You want to know, are they opening up Robo? Are they opening up Twilight? Or are they opening up Stargate? From there, we can hide our Overlord a bit. We don't leave it in the open. Don't let it get picked off by a Stalker or a Void Ray or something. Well, you would know if it was a Void Ray because you saw Stargate. The second time we need to crucially scout is our follow-up scout. And that typically happens around the 4 to 4:30 mark. The reason we do it then is because most builds against Zerg, be it Protoss or Terran, open up with some form of economic harassment. Because we all know that if you let a Zerg just do what they want to do and never touch them, you're going to have a bad time. So the most common window for that initial harassment is the 5 to 6 minute window. So we want to know what they're going to hit us with. There's pretty much no doubt in our mind that they're going to hit us. We just need to know with what. So we come back in, and that's going to be our follow-up to the initial tech. Once we see the initial tech, let's say they opened up Twilight. Well, that can mean a lot of things. Are they going Twilight into Glaives, which is the most common, but they could be going straight into Blink. They could be going straight into Charge. They could be going into Dark Templar. We need to know this, and that 4:30 scout is going to tell us what's there or what's not there, aka proxy. So those are the 2 crucial times. Beyond that, scout as much as you can. Anytime you find yourself, I don't know what to do, scout. There's a lot of ways you can do this. A couple lings running into the main, getting Overlord speed and sacrificing an Overlord, using changelings from the Overseer. Just try and keep tabs of what your opponent's doing. What do I look at while scouting? Well, that's why I've gotten into this custom game for you. See people opening Stargate and going Robotoss while I'm getting ready to fight Skytoss and get wrecked by his army. Well, Protoss has this little hidden feature that some of you may know, some of you may not. This is the Stargate. You look in the middle of that. Why is my game... There we go. You can clearly see a Phoenix being built. There's an Oracle. There's a Void Ray. There's a Tempest. There's a Carrier. Displays what they're building. Now, in terms of open up Stargate into Robotoss, that's why that secondary scout is so big. 99.9% of times, a Protoss player is going to open up Stargate versus Zerg purely due to the threat of Mutalisks. They need to get map control and they need to deter you from going Mutalisks because nothing makes a Protoss saltier than surprise flock of mutas. And they don't have a Stargate. Very, very dangerous. Now the Robo. Now, what comp should I get for each matchup? I'm not sure if mine are okay. Depends on what you scout, but to make it very simple, and this isn't always going to be true because I always need specifics to give concrete answers, but in general, anything that's robo-based, you typically want to go Roach, Hydra, Ling, and like emphasis on Roach. Yes, Roaches get countered by Immortals, but enough Roaches, and Roaches are pretty easy and cheap to pump out, you'll beat the Immortals. Anything ground-based, just try and go heavy Roach. Anything air-based, ideally, you're going to need some Hydralisks, obviously, but we're going to be going Hydra Lurker, and we want to try and get Aspire sooner than later. If they have, again, I've already said it, but the magic number of carriers is 6. If they have 3 carriers, we can deal with that with Hydras. We can. But once they get to 6 or more, that's when we just need to start Corruptors. We just do. They're going to force us into that. But yeah, air is going to be Hydralisks into Corruptors. Ground is going to be mostly Roach with some Ling support. You can also throw in some Banelings and Hydras, but mostly Roach. That is a very broad general way of approaching it, but I hope that helps a bit. Trades. When should I attack toss? As in every other matchup, if you're going all in, go all in. But if you plan to play a macro game, you basically just want to harass a lot. Just do lots of Ling and Bane run-bys. There's lots of creative ways you can do it. You can also Nidus Worm and just send in some units. You can use Dropper Lords. There's lots of different ways, but you just want to harass. When do you actually attack the toss? Well, if you hold a push from them and you absolutely destroy them, then A, move across the map. F2, take everything you have, attack into them. Ultimately, when do you attack? Comes down to what kind of style do you want to play. Do you want to play a macro game? If you get an opportunity to attack, like I said, you shut down a push, then take it. And if you don't, just constantly harass. And the goal of Zerg is to play reactive. We're playing to what our opponent is doing. So it's difficult to give you a solid answer on that without, some examples. How do I do that? It's not as... Again, I need specifics for that one. I can't give you a generalized how do I attack into Protoss. The only thing I can tell you is, like, without knowing any specifics, is try and come in from multiple angles and try and hit 2 spots at once. Do a Ling run by while you're attacking with your main army, stuff like that. How do I micro Lurkers? Lurkers don't necessarily need a lot of micro. Obviously, the better you get at the game, the more value you can get out of units by microing. However, there's also something that's called anti-micro. It's when your units would have been better off had you have not done anything. And this is kind of the case a lot with people who aren't 100% confident in their micro, especially with units like Lurkers. Because if you're constantly retargeting them, they might miss a shot or two. They might not do as much damage as they could have done if you just fucking left them alone. The only thing I want to talk about in terms of micros for Lurkers is just try and split them up a bit. When you burrow them, if you have an opportunity and you can pounce on your opponent, sure, just fucking burrow them all. But if you're setting up a siege and you're going to attack into your opponent, just try and give them a little bit of space, because the earliest way, like the most effective way that Protoss players can really deal with Lurkers until they have a bunch of carriers and stuff like that, by ground, is the Disruptor. And it takes 2 Disruptor shots to kill Lurkers. And if there's a clump of Lurkers and they get 2 huge Disruptor balls, they can take out a mass amount. But if you split them up and just put a little bit of space in between them, you're not going to get as many. We're going to leave it at that. What are good targets for my pokes, pushes, or just in my game plan? In terms of harassment, probes, that's really what you want to get. You also pick off pylons, depower stuff, be annoying. But when it comes to actually fighting, you want to deal with their splash damage first. That is pretty much a given. So if they're playing with High Templars, try and snipe those High Templars first. If they're playing with Colossi, try and pick off those Colossi first. If they're playing with Disruptors, try and pick off the Disruptors. Because splash damage is what Protoss relies on. And if you can just take away their splash damage, now all of a sudden they're just pretty much left with gateway units, which are just not that great by themselves. So that's going to be your main focus. When and how should I use Nidus properly? Again, specifics. Basically, when you're using a Nidus, if you're going all in, you want to try Nidus in the main or the natural. In, you know, ideally they don't scout it, but you want to get it into a very vulnerable place. When you're talking about just harassment, say let's swarm host Nidus, which is a very, very good game plan versus Protoss. It used to be a meta thing. You want a Nidus somewhere safe where it's not going to get picked off immediately. So outside of their main, you can launch the Locusts over the dead airspace into the main, and then safely get all of your swarm hosts back into that Nidus. That one's a bit difficult too. Is Lingbane Muta viable to play against Toss? I believe it's not because High Templars and Archons do exist. On the other hand, my comp is much faster than Toss. Anything is viable against anything. It all depends on how you approach it. Is it the most efficient? No. Mutas themselves are great against Protoss if they're a surprise. If they're not a surprise, units are not combat units. They're just not. They're harassment units. So, you know, if you go mutas, but they've already got Stargate units out, they're just going to, especially if they have more than one Stargate already, they're just going to switch to Phoenix production, just shut them down. So no, it's not always great. Is Lingbane? Yes, Lingbane can always be useful, but you have to choose what you're connecting on. If you're connecting on Zealots, High Templars, Stalkers, Sentries, yes, awesome. If you're connecting Banelings onto Archons, Immortals, not so much. It's what you get out of it. How do I deal with High Templars? The easiest way is if you can catch them off by surprise, obviously you can just snipe them. But in reality, when they're paying attention to their army, Lurkers. Lurkers with the range upgrade, they outrange High Templars. That's going to be the easiest way for you to effectively pick them off. You can also get fancy with them, and, you know, if as long as you know, I don't even want to go into it because they have the same range for feedback. But I mean, potentially you could fungal them and slow them down, stare them, so you can pick them off, stuff like that. But Lurkers is the main one. How do I do run-bys when Tossus puts 2 batteries at each base and keeps a few units at each one? Batteries are great units, but they're not the be-all, end-all. You can add a few Banelings into your run-by. You can focus down the batteries. You can send more Lings for your run-by. You know, batteries have limited amounts of energy, and if you force a super battery out of them, that means you can get ready for an attack because they're not going to have super battery to defend. Stuff like that. Yeah, I wish I could go much more in depth with that, but realistically just add some more units to your run by, snipe the batteries if you can, add some Banelings. Banelings blow up shit really fast. Batteries won't heal through Banelings. Defense and macro. How many queens should I make and when to make them? Great question. Versus Protoss, scout what they're doing. Inevitably, you always want to make a handful of queens in the early game because queens are going to be your main defensive unit. Basically, once you get 100 gas for Zergling speed, you're going to pull 2 drones off gas, so you only have 1 mining, and because you have that little bit of extra mineral income, you can keep making queens. A safe number to make without knowing the situation that you're in, I would say you're going to make 1 queen per base for the first 4 hatcheries. You're going to have 1 queen there, so you can constantly inject, and then you want to have at least 2 to 4 creep spreading queens, which can also be used defensively. And you can also pull the ones, queens are not attached by a chain to the hatchery. You can also pull your inject queens to fight with you, to be defensive, and you can just make more queens later. They're not that expensive. But I would say as a safe number, like just in general, go up to at least 6 to 8. Versus Terran, you can go a bit more, but yeah. When should I take each tech and upgrades? Focus on 1 tech at a time until you get to the late game. If you're going to play roaches, play roaches. Don't throw down a roach warren and then a baneling nest, and then try and split your effort between them. Whenever you throw down a tech building, try and get your value worth out of it. If you're going to make a roach warren, you know, make your roaches first, then start transitioning into other things. When do I get tech and upgrades? As the game goes on. Typically, you want to start 1-1 if you're playing against Protoss around the 5-minute mark. And upgrades can be a bit different depending on what you're going against. If you're going to play a Lingbane Hydra, you typically want to get melee upgrades and ranged attack upgrades, and you can ignore Carapace for a little while. If you're going to go against, you know, like a straight Sky Tosser going right into carriers and you want to bust them with Hydraless timing, then get ranged upgrade and Carapace. Carapace does help a lot, but the reality is if they're going for, you know, a standard style of play, Carapace is just not as effective because Protoss units are pretty beefy and they have a lot of damage output as is. So we don't really need to stay alive that much longer. We need to do as much damage because the more damage we do, the quicker we kill their shit, the faster we're going to survive in the long run. Carapace is important, but it's not as important in this matchup versus getting as much damage output as we possibly can. Which one of these are better to get first? Hydra range or Hydra speed? Range. Always range. Always, always, always range. That range is much more important than the speed. Is it bad to take both of same tier techs, like Roachwarren and Bane Nest, or Spire and Hydra Den? No, but like I said earlier, get your values worth out of it. Don't open up with Spire, and then before you even make a Mutalisk or Corruptor, go right into Hydralisk Den. It's just anti-climactic, or it's not the right thing to do. I've been doing this for a while. I'm sorry, my brain's kind of all over the place. But no, it's not a bad thing. Just try and get your values worth out of what you're investing into. If I want to surprise toss with Mutalisk, is it a good idea to proxy my Spire and creep from over? You can. I'm not going to say it's a bad idea, but if they find it, well, there goes your Spire, and that's a bit of an investment. That kind of sucks. So, no, I would say the easier way to do it is make it at your natural. Just bury it back in your natural, because what they're going to be scouting a lot, especially at, Diamond or below, they're pretty much just scouting your main, because that's where Zergs are going to put their tech. That's where all players are going to put their tech. Put it somewhere, put it at your natural. Don't put it at your third. It's a bit too exposed, but your natural is a bit more safe. That's where I would put it. And sure, if it's important, but I'm low diamond, then yeah, absolutely, put it at your natural. Thanks in advance. You're an awesome person. No, you're an awesome person. I hope this helped a little bit. Thank you for submitting. I really do appreciate it, man. And our final question of this video comes to us from a guy named Hope You Have a Good Day. Well, I hope you have a good day too, brother. Map out all the pervert pillars in the current map pool. Some pillars are weird for high con clarity. They are. So let's do it. This is 2000 atmospheres. The pervert pillar is right up here. When you're clicking, you can see, zoom in for you. These two things, try and click right in the middle. And hold. That is your pervert pillar on 2000 atmospheres. Moving on. Beckett Industries. I don't know who still plays this map. There's probably 10 people out there that still do. There's two. This one's really weird. This is actually a pervert pillar right over top of here, but it's a very specific spot. I wouldn't recommend using this one. The easier one is unfortunately over here. It doesn't really give you much vision, but you can still dip back and forth. Just try and click right on top of this thing. That's Beckett. This is Berlingrad. Pervert pillar is a bit disguised, but it's actually right here. When you try and click on it, your cursor actually won't go through. It won't register. It'll register over here. It'll register over here, but it won't register right there. That's how you know you're on the pervert pillar. That is Beckett, or Berlingrad, sorry. This one's also a bit tricky. There's a couple spaces where it can be seen. I really haven't mastered this one too much. What I typically do on Beckett, or I keep saying Beckett, Berlingrad, is actually just kind of keep it over here, and I can just dart back and forth. That's my personal preference, but yeah, this is the pervert pillar here on Berlingrad. Keep going. All right, Blackburn. There are two. This is the main one. We can sit it right here. You can also sit it over, yeah. But just to make sure it looks right there. When you're clicking on it, just try and click in the middle. And that's it. Let's keep going. All right, Curious Minds. This one's a fairly obvious one. Right over, yeah. So when you're clicking, just try and get right into the center of that thing. And if it looks like that, you're good to go. Pervert pillar activated. On to the next. Glittering Ashes. This one's a bit obvious, but still can be difficult. Right here, basically we want to click just to the left, or if we're in this case, just to the right of this vent that's emitting some sort of hot gas. This is your pervert pillar. Beautiful. Next one. All right. Right over here. This is Hardwire. Same kind of deal as Glittering Ashes. There's no vent, but we're going right over it. Yeah. That is your pervert pillar. Hardwire. Complete. And finally, let's knock out Pride of Alteras. All right, Pride of Alteras. I am playing with a speed mod on, so this is just faster to move my Overlord at the beginning. This one is right. Yeah. This one's also pretty obvious. That's your perfect pillar for this. And with that, that's all of our perfect pillars. And that is it. That is all of your questions. I really, really want to say thank you for all of you for submitting questions, asking questions. I'm always here in the future. Believe me, you can always DM me on Reddit or Discord or whatever. I try my best to get back as quick as I can. I'm not always the fastest, but I do what I can. You can at any point in time send me replays, whatever you want. I will happily go over them. I will happily help you whenever. I've said it before, Reddit. I'm at the point now where I've accomplished pretty much everything I wanted to accomplish out of StarCraft, and this is what I enjoy the most. Honestly, I enjoy helping people improve more than I enjoy playing the game at this point, and I still absolutely love playing the game. So again, thank you so much. Thanks for sitting through my rambles. I wish I could have made this shorter and to the point, but without specifics, I kind of bit myself in the ass on that one for opening it up like I did. But I had a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys learned something. Hopefully I answered the questions as best as I could, and good luck, have fun. Thank you so much.